Well, first, thank you for everyone that came because, I mean, doing the work is just part of the process, and it doesn't come to completion until I get to share it with people and have other people interact with it. So thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday to come. And thanks to Abby, because I love working with you. It's been great. So a little bit of my background. I'm first off, I'm a mom. I have 3 kids that I've raised. My oldest is now 20, and life's getting interesting now. I homeschooled my kids. I've been married for almost 25 years next month. And we recently moved back to Oklahoma, where I was born and raised about 4 years ago. So I'm grateful that Abby still lets me show my work here. So it's great to still be part of this art community. I have basically wanted to be an artist my entire life. Since I was little, I was drawing all the time and knew that I wanted to study it. And I went to college just to a very small liberal arts school in Oklahoma, and they had a great art program, and I studied graphic design and oil painting. And I worked for a few years in the graphic design industry, and I feel like some of that kind of comes across in my work, but I learned very quickly that the corporate world was not for me, that I was meant to be in the studio. That's where I'm the happiest. And I did end up taking a break after the birth of my kids. Raising them and homeschooling them took a lot of my time. So it wasn't until I want to say 2015 that I really got started back and had time to devote to artwork more full time. And I started showing, I think 2018 maybe was my first show. And so this will be my 4th solo show that I've done since then. So this show in particular, this was actually a really tough one for me. It's been a really interesting year. Right as I got started working on the show, my husband and I started renovating a 100-year-old farmhouse, his grandparents' farmhouse, and our life kind of got turned upside down. So I don't know if anybody's done big projects like that, but we were working with contractors, and I designed the floor plan. And so I was trying to juggle painting and that, and then my son wanted to homeschool again. So life was just really crazy. And kind of in the mix of all that, I was not really doing very well emotionally. I had a lot that I was dealing with, just still trying to cope from the move from 4 years ago. And I kind of was finding myself in a bit of a bad place about halfway through this show. So I'm going to try to keep it together while I'm talking. Sorry. I had originally started this whole show with a different theme, and things just didn't feel right. I had told a friend of mine that I didn't want this show to be about me at all. I wanted to paint about something totally different, and that just wasn't working. And I, strangely enough, I started noticing these really large flocks of birds near our house. These huge clouds that would sort of morph and twist. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen them before. And I kind of became this idiot standing in my grocery store parking lot staring at these flocks of birds. As I say flock, I mean, it was like multiple flocks. So there were thousands of birds in this huge cloud, and it would just shift and dance. And it was just like amazing. So I was staring at these birds, and after a few weeks, I was like, okay, I really need to research these and figure out what it is. And they're called murmurations. And it's primarily the European starling that creates these murmurations. And scientists don't really know why they do it exactly. They think that it's communication between these communities, that they come together and they share information about where predators might be or where food sources might be. And I just found it really fascinating. But the most fascinating part about it was, I felt, was the way they were able to shift their form so quickly, was because one particular bird was directly affected by the 6 or 7 birds that it was surrounded by. And I just felt like that was such a beautiful metaphor for our society, that us as individuals, as humans, we go through life and we are very much affected by the people that we surround ourselves with. And I just thought it was very just beautiful. And so I kind of decided that's what I wanted this show to be about. So So I started working on it, and this was the first piece that I did that was part of the Murmuration concept, and really enjoyed the process of painting this. And then my second painting that I started was this one, the middle on the wall, Take Wing. And it originally had 2 figures in that painting, and something felt very off about it to me. And even though the composition was probably more balanced at that point, it still felt very unbalanced. And I ended up painting that figure out, and I didn't really understand why at the time, but I just felt like that figure needed to be gone. It needed to be a solitary figure. And I think it was about that time, as I started painting in the show, that I really kind of got to a very low place. And sorry. I had a little bit of a breakdown, and talking things out and just kind of reflecting on things. I kind of started trying to figure out why I was even painting birds, because I've never painted birds really before. And I sometimes will just sit down with my journal and write things out just to try and process stuff. And I kind of came to this realization that the whole reason I even was drawn to these murmurations and painting them wasn't really so much the birds themselves, or even my fascination with the beauty of the formations they made, but my lack of community and my struggle with having that loss. Because I went for a long time, and if you've been in my artist talks before, I think there's been a little bit of these elements that I've dealt with in some of my shows in the past 4 years, but it was something that I knew was really affecting me, but I was trying to kind of push off. Because when we left Colorado, I raised my family here, and we really developed these very tight-knit communities, between schools and church and friends and the art community here. And then suddenly I am in a small town in Oklahoma, and I don't have that at all anymore. And so I really was suffering this great loss of a community, and kind of felt that like I needed to be grown up about it, and I needed to just accept it, and it was what it was. And so I suppressed that for a long time. And then about the middle of the show, or I'd say probably about the time I started painting on that one, it really started affecting me so much, to the point that I wasn't enjoying painting anymore at all. And I've done art my whole life, and so to really kind of get to that point where I was showing up to the studio every single day and putting the work in, and technically the work was okay. I was not unhappy with what I was doing, but I wasn't connected to it, and I wasn't enjoying it for the first time in my life. And that's not totally uncommon, because if you're an artist, you do artwork, there's ups and downs. It's hard. Some days you have great days in the studio, some days it's really hard. But this was very different. This was me not really even finding any joy in it at all anymore. And so I knew something had to change. And so when I had that realization of why I was struggling so much, the show needed to kind of take a shift. And I want to say it was probably just a day or two later. So sometimes I get some of my inspiration for like that time when you're kind of in between dreams and waking up in the morning. And I was kind of waking up and had this vision of a woman walking along a landscape, like a horizon, with a bundle of strings and carrying like a bundle of balloons, but they weren't balloons, they were paper birds. And I immediately woke up and started like making some notes in my phone so I didn't forget it, because I felt like for me, that was much more prevalent than the actual birds, because these kind of spoke to what I was longing for in my past. Like, this was my community, my murmuration that I no longer had. And so for the last 4 years, I've basically been kind of trying to construct and create this sort of set for myself, and spending a lot of time in my studio alone. And I do have my family, but it's just very different. So my daughter, who has kind of been my muse in a lot of my paintings because she's available and she's willing, she took on the task of making all the paper birds for me so we could do the photo shoot, which was great. One of the hard things about this show, I said that we were renovating the farmhouse. Well, about 2 months prior to me wrapping up this show, we had to move. We sold our house early, which was great, but that meant I had to move my studio and we had to pack everything up, and our house was not finished. So I moved with basically an unfinished show, and I had 3 pieces that still were incomplete, and I ended up finishing them in my construction zone of a home, which was an interesting experience. And I really struggled with not being able to really bring this show to what I wanted it to be. Which I'm okay with now. I had to just come to terms with that, but it's definitely a theme that I want to explore a little bit further. So, if anybody has any questions, I think yes.
So do you think that you raise that figure because you feel like nobody around?
I felt like, yeah, and looking back on it, I really felt like once I kind of identified what it was that I was really needing to talk about, because I do feel so alone, and it didn't make sense to have another figure in there. So they needed to be solitary figures in each of the pieces. Sorry. So when I originally started this piece, I was really trying to figure out how to paint this Murmurations, but I failed miserably at trying to. I enjoy painting clouds a lot. I usually have clouds or storms in my shows. And I attempted to kind of recreate what these Murmurations look like, and it was terrible. So I decided I'm a figurative artist, so I honed back in and more of a micro view. And so I photographed some dancers that live in the town where I live. And so they're modern dancers, so I just kind of explained to them what the show was about. And so they were just in these fluid movements, which is where these 3 pieces came from. I just felt like they were very dramatic and really captured kind of a lot of the emotion that I was struggling with. So I think that's part of the landscapes that I wanted to put in there. I think that for me, that was sort of like a little bit of a hope. So these are actually landscapes that were pulled from the farm that we just moved to. And so just kind of like something new on the horizon, and that hopefulness that things will change. And I like to do the studies because I can kind of work out some compositional things and kind of play with some different ideas. Every now and then there's a painting I'm really excited about that I don't tackle a drawing on, and quite honestly, this painting may not have occurred had I done a drawing for it, because when I finished the last bird, I was like ready to celebrate because it was a lot of birds. But yeah, so I don't do drawings for everyone, but especially when I'm starting a show, typically I like to do the drawings just to kind of work some things out. Thank you. How quickly they shift. And if you have any interest in looking it up, look up Murmurations. Some of the formations that they make are unreal and almost look like they're like forming images, like birds or different animals and things like that. It's very cool.
But they're very in the here and now, because they're just like going with the group. Can't really be thinking.
No, yeah, they're just kind of, it's orchestrated just by the movement of the other birds around them. So
it's interesting that you were saying that they're like birds that are around them or whatever. Now they say that you're almost like the X number of people.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
Like, I'm not really around anybody, you know.
Yeah.
Your family, but they're gonna know.
That's, yeah, and exactly they are. Especially, I mean, and I think that's one of the things that's kind of hard about being an artist is you have to have that alone time. And you need it. I can't really work very well if I'm around a lot of people, but it's also a very isolating, lonely job. And then I would leave my isolating, lonely job and still be isolated and lonely. So, yeah. So now that everybody's really cheerful, like, sufficiently depressed everybody for the evening. So.
You're not the only one. So I'm a psychologist, and a lot of April's paintings are in my office. And I say this in all sincerity, I think that they like find themselves in that. There's like something that they see that people haven't been able to put words to. There's this dictionary. I forget the author, but it's called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, and it's all these made-up words of like to describe this experience. And so I think that's what your paintings do a lot. Is they're describing to my context. I feel that, but I don't have the word for it.
Yeah, and then it's become my voice. So I was kind of laughing, and I told my friend that I didn't want to paint about me. I'm coming to the realization that that's just what I do. This is how I kind of deal with things in my life, and I don't go to therapy, so this is my therapy, and I work. Yeah. So I work through things through that, and yeah, I'm accepting that now. Thank you so much for coming.